What's going on, everybody? It is TripleCrown24 back today with a new card dealings podcast. It's a podcast about selling sports cards. For the first time on this show, and undoubtedly not the last time, I am diving into the arena of repackers. Repacks is the hot buzzword in the hobby in 2025, and regardless of how you may think that they impact the hobby for how you choose to engage with it, I'm here to tell you that repackers have left a very prominent impact and footprint on the sports card ecosystem. However you may choose to buy and sell cards, there's definitely been at least a ripple effect that has resulted from the rise of repacks. As someone who is focused on selling cards, a lot of people assume that repackers are a huge net positive for me because of some of the benefits they apply. And at times, that is true. But there are also many instances where they are more of a net negative to me. And I think I'm kind of leaning more towards the latter as the current landscape of things plays out in here in 2025, heading into the fall, heading into the start of football season. And this doesn't mean that I'm not going to sell to repackers. In fact, this past weekend I had several come up at Shipshawana Card Fest who at least looked at my case, or a few of them did definitely buy things from me. A couple of them built, several cards into a bundle deal from me. I'm not going to stop dealing with them if it makes sense for me, of course. But then when it comes time to restock my inventory, there are some challenges that they are putting in front of me, so to speak, that I need to adapt to if I want to sustain the success of my business. I think this is all stuff that is very important to also consider if you are someone who sets up at shows or sells cards with any sort of frequency, because a lot of these things I'm going to say probably have impacted you too, whether you have consciously thought about it or not. Also in today's show, I'm going to be debuting a new segment where I give a shout out to a fellow YouTube content creator, talk a little bit more about who that is for this first time around and why I am doing it later on in the show. And of course the mailbag, where I respond to a pertinent comment or question from the previous episode and kind of give a bit of a long form answer here on the pod. For now, though, let me talk about the benefits that repackers provide. Most of this is probably common knowledge and makes sense when I say it, but cash flow is number one. When I'm set up at a show, my most valuable asset is my cash, because there is an adage out there that as a dealer, you make your money when you buy rather than you sell, which seems counterintuitive because that's quite literally the opposite of having money come in. You're putting money out there when you're acquiring inventory, but making a good buy is one of the more challenging parts. In today's environment, making a good sale is not as difficult as it is to source quality cards at prices that make sense. Because of that, repackers have made things a little bit more difficult for me, because the cash flow that they are providing to me is also being provided to fellow dealers out there, as well as people who are attending these shows. Because sometimes there are repackers who are buying tables or getting into these shows early. So I'll give you an example here. For example, Midwest Monster earlier this summer. When I walked in on Friday, this is several hours before early access people were able to get in, much less general admission people were able to get in. These are people who are just coming to attend the show and shop. There were dozens of repack guys going around buying before I was even in the door ready to set up. There were guys who purchased tables just for the access to the dealer badge. They might have spent enough time to have a cup of coffee at their table the entire weekend. Otherwise, they were out going around trying to buy things up. how does that impact the show from there? Well, if a dealer like myself has had a lot of cards bought up, what do we need to do? We have to restock somehow, some way, especially if we have all this overhead cost of going in, setting up at the show. You want the most bang for your buck possible. That means that these dealers are going to have to go around to the dealers who haven't already been hit up by repackers, which a lot of them have been, and try to maybe buy from fellow dealers. But how many fellow dealers are you going to be able to buy from at a margin that makes sense for you? It's probably going to be few and far between, especially if quite a few dealers are going to be trying to do the exact same thing. They're also going to be trying to buy from people who walk up to their table. Example of that, if you go watch Neo Cards and Comics Ship Shawana video, one of the main points of emphasis that he had was that he was getting waved down by dealers at their tables trying to solicit him to buy his cards. And he wasn't even someone carrying around a Zion case or one of the rolly bags or anything like that would kind of make him a marked man for, hey, this guy might have some stuff that we want to buy for our inventory. But that's how desperate, I guess you could say, a lot of these dealers were for inventory, is that they needed to pretty much ask anybody and anybody who would look their way to sell them cards, especially at a margin that made sense for them. Bring cards up to their table because maybe they didn't get a chance to walk around, or they didn't have enough to bring with them to sustain a full weekend of selling, and they need to get the most that they can out of the weekend trip. Then when you have people walking around the shows looking to sell, you have sometimes, and I do not promote this practice at all, in fact they really frown upon it, but you'll have some repackers who aren't set up at the show, who are just going around and who will wave people down, or they will solicit them on the show floor and take those opportunities away from dealers to buy cards. Guys will walk around and ask patrons who might have Zion cases, hey, you selling anything? And they'll go off on the corner, or if they're extremely bold, they'll go on a dealer's table and try to make a deal, which you should never do. By the way, you should not go try to make a deal with someone unless that person owns the table, or you own the table. Just throwing that out there. And then those people don't have cards that the dealers want anymore. Or if these people haven't been waved down yet, they have in the back of their mind, okay, I'll go to trade night and a repacker will come by at trade night, because you better believe the repackers are at trade night as well. Or they'll reach out to them on Instagram. There are a lot of ways to access these guys. In fact, it could be even more streamlined. I don't want to put ideas out there, but truthfully, it could be even more streamlined to make it even easier to access these guys. And in some cases, I'm starting to see that become more and more of a thing. Maybe that's something I'll talk about a little bit later on. But this is a domino effect at this point, where dealers are getting wiped out early on. They have this cash. Okay. Problem is now they have nowhere to spend this cash, because the people coming up don't want to sell to the dealers at the margins that they're used to, because a repacker will pay them more. The repackers have also wiped out other dealers, so it's hard to go to a neighboring table and try to restock, because that guy's having the same problem that you are probably. And then you might think, okay, well, these guys can't be doing that every single show, right? I would beg to differ, because a lot of these guys, all they're doing is traveling from major show to major show, weekend after weekend. They're getting in and they're getting out. A lot of times they're not booking hotel rooms. They're getting right back on the next flight as soon as they are finished at the show to wherever they are going back to. And a lot of times, once they get back home, those cards are already sold. They have spreadsheets ready to go with what they have, what the cards sell for, what they're willing to offer them at, and they are moving those cards. Now, they are usually working on extremely thin margins. I'm talking a lot of these guys, they might try to buy at, we'll say, 80% of what they think that they can sell it to the repacker for. But a lot of times, they're going to be paying a lot more than that, because they know what the repacker will pay for their cards, and they know that they need to be turning a significant amount of volume when the margins shrink down to only 5 to 10%. And if you are doing an insane volume, you can make it work, but you need to be doing an insane volume. I cannot emphasize that term enough. It needs to be millions and millions of dollars a year for those kind of margins to work for you to make a living off of it. And with the amount of time and travel expenses that these guys having going into those shows, that is only adding to what their bottom line needs to be and what their total gross revenue needs to be on a year-to-year basis for them to be able to succeed. Now, for me, my model is a little bit different. I move at a bit of a slower pace. I still have a really good turnover on my inventory, I would say. Part of that is because I do a lot of shows at a frequency where I don't want people to come back and see the exact same thing, barring maybe 5 to 10 new cards in my showcases that they saw last time, because that might discourage people from coming to the shows. If they're not discouraged by the repackers kind of wiping out a lot of popular cards right away that they might be looking for, well, that is only going to add to it if I only have things that they've seen several times over. And I don't want that for the customers. It also, it hurts the show promoter because the show promoter wants good quality vendors, and I take pride in that. I want to be a vendor that is a good representation of the show that people can come to and can expect to pay a fair price. And when I say a fair price, I mean fair for both them and for me on the cards that they're interested in. And with the rise of repackers, I have had to pivot in ways. If you watch my Ship Shawana vlogs that I've put out to this point, you might notice that my football case is pretty slim towards the end of the show. It wasn't really all that great in terms of number of cards and the total value of the cards at the start of the show to begin with. That is largely because I've kind of given up just trying to pick up one or two cards here or there football-wise to have in my case, because I am fighting an uphill battle, and the only way that I can really do it is to basically make nothing on it, or to make a margin so small that it's really not worth time, capital, or energy to do that. Because I know I'm going to get beaten down on them. I know that it's probably just going to get gobbled up by another repacker at some point anyways. So really, why am I going through all that effort to have a 5 to 10% margin, if any kind of margin at all, if I'm not losing something, just so I can say that I had these cards? If I really wanted to, I could turn TripleCrown24 into a business that generates $1 million in gross revenue a year. And that's really, a milestone goal for me. I would love to get to that point. But I don't want to do it in a way where my total expenses are $975,000, because I can't live off of $25,000 a year. So just because I might be bringing in a large amount doesn't necessarily mean that it's a profitable endeavor. And that's really what I'm focusing on, is a sustainable, profitable business. That is what will keep me still doing shows 10, 15, 20 years from now, which is where I want to be. So how do I get around this? How do I get around the repackers being very competitive in a marketplace where I am trying to restock my own inventory, as well as other dealers who are my colleagues in this whole thing? Well, the first thing, I kind of already alluded to it, is avoiding ultra-modern football. You probably won't see me with downtowns in my case going forward, because I know people who will just buy them instantly. I will really only buy them if I know I have something lined up, because a 5% margin is a little bit different when you have the deal lined up right away. I'll give you an example. If I have a card that walks up to my table for $1,000, and I know 10 minutes later I can sell it for $1,050, I'll probably buy it, especially if I know for sure that that person is reliable who I'm going to sell it to, and that is exactly what they're going to pay. If I gave someone $1,000 and they said, hey, I'm going to come back in 10 minutes, and when I do, I'm going to give you $1,050 back. I'll do that every single time. I can part with that $1,000 for 10 minutes. If I found $50 laying on the ground, yeah, I would pick it up. Why not? It's free money at that point. But now if I buy that card for $1,000 and I take it home with me and I'm having to post it online and then I got to ship it out and I got to take the time to market the card and I'm only selling it for $1,050, then that is not a sustainable practice. So it is somewhat relative to how fast you are moving it. But generally speaking, I'm not going to be buying these cards because of the pace that I move at just to kind of kick the can down the road and try to make a very minuscule amount on them within a month or so. It's just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And it means I have to move into things that aren't the big flashy names. I'm not going to be buying cards of the hot young rookie quarterback that just had a 4-touchdown game the previous week. That's probably not going to be my game. I'm going to have to pick some retired players. I'm going to have to stick with what is my favorite sport to deal in, my favorite sport to collect, my favorite sport to watch, and that is baseball. It's been my number one for pretty much as long as I can remember, aside from when I was really young and hockey was my number one, but quite a bit of time has passed since then. I might just have to stick with that kind of stuff. And look, repackers have infiltrated those spaces too. There are plenty of repackers out there for baseball, plenty for basketball. I am fairly confident they're out there for wrestling, UFC. What else am I missing? Hockey that I just mentioned there. I'm sure they're out there. I just really haven't crossed paths with them, and they're certainly not as prominent as the football repackers that you've probably seen at your local show or at any larger show you might have attended yourself. So yeah, I might not be able to get as much ultramodern football, but that is okay. As long as I'm buying things that I'm still passionate about and just waiting for the right opportunities to buy the ultramodern football when it makes sense for me, then that's perfectly fine. I can still keep the train chugging with all that in mind. The second thing is that if I do want to dive into ultramodern football, or really anything for that matter, repackers will tend to avoid cards that do not have recent sales data, or as they like to say sometimes, a direct comp. And a direct comp would mean that that specific card has sold previously. An example, I think I've mentioned this card in a previous podcast. The Jalen Hurts 101 gold standard autograph I have. There is what you could say is a direct comp on it. It happened in March of 2024. That means that these repackers, if they really wanted to, could reference that card and that one sale if they needed to when trying to buy a card like that, which is usually going to be a chaser card unless it is some of the big boys that fill these multi-$1,000 repacks. That's typically not who you're dealing with, though. A card like that, in the vast majority of repacks, is going to be a chaser, if not the main chaser. But if that card didn't have that sale on it, they would probably avoid it like the plague, because there's nothing for them to go off of. If it's a brand new product, that might scare them away as well, because usually brand new products, the markets are very volatile, and what they buy it for now might be more than what it's going for by the time it makes it into their repack. Now, are they being honest and actually putting in for the current value at the time of when they pack it into their own product? Well, that's going to vary repacker to repacker, and this is not the time to dive into the ethics of repacks. That could be several podcasts on its own accord. So I'll leave that standing for a future point in time. But without those direct sales on those cards, repackers will probably want to avoid them. And if they are cards that are more suited towards collectors, collectors will give you an offer. They don't care that there's a previous sale or if there's nothing to go off of. If they want it, they know what they're willing to pay for it. They know what they think is a fair price, and I know what I think is a fair price. And if those two things align, we're shaking hands and we are making a deal happen more times than not. So that's something that you can do. That also ties into my next point of being able to curate your inventory for collectors. I know my regulars who come up to my table at shows and what they like. I also know people who frequent the shows who may not always buy from me, but I know the kind of cards that they like. I know people who I've known in the hobby, maybe not directly through shows, or I at least don't see them all that often. I know what they're looking for, and I know what they're willing to offer on those types of cards. So I'll purposely be on the lookout for those types of cards because I already know where my buyer is, and they're a collector, and I know what they're willing to pay, and I can then try to form my process of acquiring said card in a way that makes sense for me, that again gets me that margin that I want to be at. If I have those types of cards in my case, I will likely draw more attention from collectors than I will repackers. I'll probably end up making stronger sales that are closer to my desired price, which I would say is my sticker price on them. And generally speaking, I'm also usually pretty happy too, because I like seeing a collector happy when they get a card. It's a feeling that I have felt many times over, and that is part of why I love doing this, is being able to be the one who puts that card in their collection, whether it's just kind of another notch in the belt for them, or if it's one of their grails, so to speak. It's kind of a term that's overused, but a card that has significant meaning to them, if nothing else, right? That is something that is a fantastic feeling. Something else that I can do in a large picture sense is buying entire collections. The nice thing about repackers is that a lot of the work for them is short and sweet. Now, if you are the one who is building a checklist for a repack, actually assembling the physical packs, like putting them into the little packages or the bubble mailers or whatever you may be using, and assigning numbers to them in a lottery system, and then running your whatnot stream where you sell them, that is a lot of work. I have seen it firsthand, what people do to put all that work into making those. It is hours and hours of work. But if you are the middleman for these repackers, or you are strictly the buyer for them, well, then your job is probably quite a bit easier than that, because oftentimes all you're doing is turning in a spreadsheet and getting cashed out. Now, there is your time to go around and acquire these cards. You got to look them up, right? You got to make sure that you know what you're going to get for them from the repacker. You need to make sure that you're buying them for less than that. But compared to some of the other alternatives that there is to making money in sports cards, that is a heck of a lot easier, especially when you are able to turn it over that fast, because sports cards are definitely not liquid assets. There are definitely cards that are more liquid than other ones, but they are not liquid assets. In a vacuum, sports cards are not liquid assets. I cannot emphasize that enough. By buying a whole collection, you are going to be taking on some things that you may not necessarily want to take on. Repackers don't really want to do that, especially the guys who you are probably dealing with, who are the middlemen for the actual repackers. They're the ones going out and buying. Because if the repacker doesn't want it, what do they do? What do they do? Where do they go and sell it? Because they're not selling at eBay. They're usually not setting up at shows. They're usually not streaming on whatnot on their own. Some of them do. But where are you going to move this card at? Especially when their margins are so thin that they can't really afford to take too many losses on too many cards, or just eat the cost on a certain card, because all of a sudden that bankroll is going to really start to tighten up, and they're not going to be able to replenish their bankroll for the next show when it's time to buy more for these repacks, because buying 100 cards in the show might be good enough for one repack, but that might only take up a few hours of the day. Some of these really big time guys are running repacks non-stop. They need them 7 days a week, multiple times a day throughout the entire week as well. So that 100 cards, that 200 cards, that 500 cards goes through a lot quicker than you might think. It is a hot knife through butter at times, especially the larger the repacker that we're talking about. With a collection, when you're buying it, you may have avenues to move some of those cards that don't appeal to the repackers. You're also going to likely get a better deal buying in bulk, because there's a lot more work that you're going to have to do. And those repackers, they do not have the time to do that work. Now, you might not have the time either, but you're kind of in a tough spot, right? If you want to be able to get some really good cards from someone, they're definitely going to be more inclined to give you a better deal if you're willing to take on some things that you don't necessarily want to take on. When you're giving someone the opportunity to wipe their hands clean of everything, that is a very strong offer you are presenting to them. It is very easy to cherry pick, some of their best cards. It might even be their most expensive cards, but to truly take everything is something that I can't understate how valuable of an offer that is to someone who is looking to sell their stuff, especially if there's not really anything that they have that they're attached to or they're wanting to keep. That is pretty much giving them the ultimate get out of jail free card if they really need the cash, or they're just simply disinterested and want to move on as fast as they can. So those are kind of what I've been doing. Buying in bulk, buying whole tables out, buying collections, trying to avoid the ultra-modern football unless it absolutely makes sense for me, and maybe taking some risks on some cards where there is no direct sales data and there is really no clear expectation for me on what I am going to get back in return for that card. Now, how long can I keep this up for? How long is this whole repack thing going to go on? I don't think that there is an end in sight, but I do certainly think that change is coming. This is definitely a topic that could be explored more in its own separate podcast. But here's something to keep in mind. Corporations within the sports card hobby, when they see someone, the average Joe, being able to figure out the system and work the system in a way where they are able to turn a larger profit on some of these products or generate significant income, those corporations will do what they can to get their hands in the cookie jar. They are going to make sure that they take that money back into the house where it originated from. I'd be willing to bet that Fanatics this time next year has at least a pretty firm grip on the repack game with their own brand. We're already kind of seeing it with certain companies. Like if you look at Leaf, go look at the Leaf booth at the National. They are really focused on buying products much more than they are selling. Same thing with the usual players, your arena clubs, your hit parades. Think about PSA and what they are offering now, where they are offering to buy slabs from people. They are introducing events where you can submit your cards at a discount and get them into the PSA vault, where you can auction them off through PSA's eBay account, or you can sell them directly to PSA. And what is PSA doing with them? Be willing to bet that at least part of that formula and part of that strategy of why they've implemented that is for some kind of repack. And if these guys are doing it with these massive platforms such as Fanatics, such as PSA, what that is going to do is create even more demand for these cards. And these guys have very deep pockets. These companies will be able to really throw their weight around a lot more than some of the small-time repackers who are going around local shows. So what I would guess is a lot of these corporations will probably look to either buy out some of these repack companies and kind of just take them underneath their own umbrella if they're above board and they like what they're doing, or they'll send their own guys out and just crush the competition. But if you are a small-time repacker or someone who's looking to get into it, I would be very cautious because it has never been more competitive than it is right now. And I think you're going to start to see things turn probably around the start of the new year. Once football season comes to a close, I would imagine that the ball will really be rolling on some of these more mainstream companies, if you will, producing their own repacks. That's just a guess, but that is kind of how I see this thing shaping up. And if that's the case, then I might need to pivot from the strategies that I've already laid out even more. But that is a bridge that I will cross when I need to cross it. All right, let's go into the shout out. I talked at length about repacks today, and there is a channel I want to shout out that has been doing a podcast for many, many years, and it is The Ball Card Show. Jason and Gary. I know Gary a lot better than I know Jason. I've known Gary for years in the show scene. Fantastic dealer. I've really been binge watching the podcasts that they have put out quite a bit recently in my free time, sometimes watching them a couple times over to make sure I'm really digesting the information. And repacks have definitely been a subject on several of their podcasts as of late, and just generally speaking. So if this is a topic that you really were interested in today, I would encourage you to check those episodes out that they put out, as well as just their other content in general. They do a lot of selling-based content as well. So if you're someone who enjoys my stuff, I would really encourage you to check them out because I think that you would enjoy them as well. I will leave a link in the description of whatever platform you may be listening on to their YouTube channel, but you can also find them wherever you may get your podcasts at The Ball Card Show. Okay, with that, I want to kind of talk about why I am doing that. It's just because I want to be able to lift others up in the community. I've received shout outs before that have helped my channel tremendously, and I don't have the largest reach. I'm definitely not a massive content creator out there, but I want to at least point people in the direction of other channels that I learn from and that I enjoy watching, because I think that you might as well, and it just helps us connect better. It helps build more of a sense of community, and that's something that I would like to do a little bit better job on my channel. That's kind of the reason that I'm introducing that, and will continue to do so going forward. Let's quickly move into the mailbag here. This is from the What Does 80% of Comps Actually Mean over on YouTube, and this comment comes from at Mark Stein 1916, who writes in to say, too much variance within the grades. Any card that was graded 5+ years ago would grade 2 full points lower if submitted today. Since comps are not apples to apples, the entire system is flawed. Grading is a scam. Do not buy into it. I will say this. Grading is not a scam, but it is what you make of it. I think we have really moved into a time where people don't look at the cards they're buying if they're in a slab, if it says 9 or 10. Really, if it says 10, but usually also if it says 9. I think sometimes we're more concerned with what that little numerical digit or digits may be on the slab than what is actually inside that piece of plastic. Because that's really what it is, a piece of plastic with someone's opinion on it. Someone's opinion that we collectively as a hobby value or don't value, depending on what grading company you are talking about. But grading, in my opinion, is not a scam. It is a great tool if used properly. I think with repacks in particular, they really enjoy it because grading a card allows really no questions about condition. It's something that we can agree upon. But yes, all grades are not created equal. There are cards that you could pull out of a repack, for example, that are graded a PSA 9, and you can go crack it out, send it back to them 10 times. You might get 5 10s, 4 9s, and a 7. It really depends on who's grading it that day. But that's nothing new. You could have said the same thing 10 years ago because there is going to be that human element. There's even variance within the graders themselves. You might get the same grader several times. You'll never really know. But it might just be how they're feeling that day or how their opinion might have changed on a card. When you are getting that company, whichever one it may be, the same thing applies for BGS, same thing applies for SGC, whatever one you might use. Because there is that human element into it, and there are several different humans who are grading it, you cannot say that the brand of PSA, SGC, BGS is the same voice universally across every graded card, that it's the same opinion, and that it is measured on the exact same criteria, even though it's supposed to be. Even though these graders are trained based on guidelines that are set by the companies, which, by the way, the guidelines have changed over the years, it is still not going to be perfect. They'll strive for perfection, but there is no way to possibly ever achieve it. That being said, it's better than the alternative where every single card is raw and really we just have to use our best judgment. I think grading does more good than it does harm, but only if it's used properly. You shouldn't just blindly trust a grade either. Do your own research, look at it for yourself, and make sure you're happy with a card before you purchase it. So thank you so much for that comment. Just something I wanted to touch on very briefly. Hopefully you enjoyed today's episode. As always, we'll be back next week with a new one. I'll see you then. Take care. Stay safe. Be kind.